Good evening and welcome to the show On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amara. Now, a few weeks from now, many political parties will be engaged in the exercise. A few weeks ago, many political parties have been engaged in the exercise of registering and nominating aspirants for party flag bearers, an exercise that depicts the hate of politics and the start of shaping the country's leadership for the next 5 years. In other words, we are into the election period full throttle. Let me introduce my panel this evening. I have the Honorable Jimmy Akena, President of Uganda People's Congress. I have the Vice Chairperson of the National Consultative Forum, Mr. Benjamin Katana. And I also have retired Ambassador James Kinobe. Well, we are back on the show. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope we're going to have a very engaging discussion this evening about the roadmap, but also many aspects. Let me begin with you, Mr. Benjamin Katana, because you are the VC National Consultative Forum. Yesterday, the National Consultative Forum met with the chairperson of the Electoral Commission. So exactly, if you could just bring us to speed on what transpired.
No, the starting point is that for the benefit of our viewers, the National Consultative Forum is a platform that brings together all political parties in Uganda. It's a statutory body that each party of the 27 political parties that are registered in Uganda now, because we have 2 new ones, each party sends a representative to the National Consultative Forum. And the leadership is on the basis of numerical strength in Parliament. So it is chaired by the NRM, the Honorable Chiwanda, and I'm Vice Chairperson on account of what I have mentioned. So yesterday we were having a plenary session where all because it has different organs and committees, where all the representatives of the parties were expected to be. And the discussions focused on a number of aspects, especially as we head into the general elections, bearing in mind what has bedeviled our electoral processes in Uganda, particularly the overbearing partisan involvement of the members of the armed forces in the electoral processes. And special attention was on the just concluded youth elections, where in a number of places here in Kampala and in all the parts of the country where the process was marred by irregularities and members of the security forces taking over the process, in the process locking out youth from especially the opposition from participating in these processes, cancelling nominations, ensuring that there was voting without following the register, but basically undermining what would have been a democratic process. So the discussions were around those areas. The discussions also focused on the question of public financing of political parties. For the benefit of the viewers, is that under the Political Parties and Organizations Act, political parties that are represented in Parliament are entitled to support from the public coffers. And as a result, in every quarter, the government of Uganda, one of the biggest threats to democracy is misinformation. So once we have this opportunity, it is always important that we try to inform the public. So every financial year, every quarter, the political parties that are represented in Parliament receive support, again, on the basis of representation in Parliament. And so there's another provision, I think particularly section 14B of that act, which provides for, because that funding that is on the basis of numerical strength is to support the day-to-day activities of political parties. Now, the other limb to that provision is that during the year of elections, the parties that are represented in parliament should receive equal support to enable them go through the electoral processes. Now that has not been happening, and it was one of the contentious areas that the meeting focused on. And a number of entities, political parties, had written to Electoral Commission raising this issue, written to the Attorney General, including the Uganda People's Congress that the Honorable Jimmy leads here. And the response is what left members a bit dissatisfied, because the response was that the appropriation that the Electoral Commission gets now is for the day-to-day running of the activities of political parties, but not the election year. I need to emphasize that this consultative forum was conceived as a platform that is intended to foster a culture of tolerance, political parties talking to each other, and building consensus regardless of the different political opinions that people have. So that as a country, we have where we can go and discuss and say this is the minimum consensus that and the direction the country should take regardless of our different shades of opinion.
Honorable Jimmy Akena, President Uganda People's Congress, if you want funding or resources to come to your party, the equation is one: increase on your numerical strength in parliament, and like Kasaija says, money will come.
Thank you. Let me build on what my young brother here has raised. I have been one person who has invested heavily in iPod. I have put all my political capital on this issue of that we must be able as a country, despite our political differences, to be able to communicate and talk on the best interests of the country. Now, the funding formula, which is being toyed around and being placed upon the parties, which my brother has raised, is that what we had agreed in iPod was how do we strengthen the political parties as entities which are key to the democracy. And this is what I did as chair of iPod, was to look at this particular area, which I'm very familiar with. How do you run a political party which is able to provide policy solutions which will work for Uganda? Now, we have a lot of weaknesses which have occurred because of some of the history, because of some of the restrictions which we went through. So under iPod, I was able to steer the iPod organization to appreciate, because what we agree in iPod is something which is mutually agreeable. There's nothing you can pass in iPod which does not work against, which works against another party. So I was able to steer this issue on the question of funding. And what we agreed on the funding was, as far as to strengthen the parties, we needed funds to operate different areas. And these inputs came from different political parties. I had my own views, other parties came in, but all those views congregated, and we agreed on a formula which moved the funding from the 10 billion which it used to be before 2020 to 35 billion annually for the parties. Now, of that 35 billion, which we agreed in 2020 was 70% goes on numerical strength, as it has been going. Now, numerical strength, we'll divide that on 70% of that 35 billion goes on numerical strength. 15%, which is equivalent to 5 billion, goes equally to the parties represented in parliament. And this one is tied to certain activities. For example, delegates conference, national council, these policy organs, which on average across the parties which we looked at, it was roughly between 700 to about 1,000, except NRM has I don't know how they handle their figures, but their figures are a bit disproportionate. But roughly it was about 700. So we tried to factor in at least a meeting once a year at that level. We also put in place funding for officers, to maintain officers. And this was what the chairman of NRM is the one who raised this one. He wanted funding for the officers, because you find these offices open as we're now in this electoral season. But you go and look for those offices by May of next year, most of those offices would be closed, right? And a lot of those offices disappear until we come to the next election cycle and people come. So we try to look for a formula which works for the parties, because I honestly believe that political parties are a key ingredient to the democracy and to the stability of the country. A strong NRM, organized NRM, a strong UPC, a strong LOOP, a strong DP works for the party. I mean, works for the country.
Yes.
So that was my push. We got it through. Now, all of a sudden, when we come to this period of election, amendments are being moved in Parliament, where even the move of the amendment, you ask, they don't know. The seconder, they don't know. And this whole thing is, playing games. But we are on a very serious task. How do we handle the politics of Uganda, which is going to be able to keep us together? At the end of the day, we're Ugandans. We don't have another country.
Do you get a feeling that they want to strangle you financially so that you don't become a problem politically to the NRM?
It is more than strangling financially, because for all these years, one of the key elements of suppressing the parties was to harm their operations. So for very many years, we were restricted, we could not operate. When we were allowed to operate, you still had restrictions. There are some restrictions which occur, but also the financial restriction. I have seen, I don't know how true it is, maybe Major Chinobe can give us a clear picture. I have heard that they spent 42 billion on the grassroots structure, right? Which is beyond the scope of even this funding which we're talking about through Parliament. Now the next question is, what going concerns are there which NRM is involved with? How much funds do they collect from membership? Because when you break it down, where did this 42 billion come from? If I am, as UPC president, to get funds from outside Uganda, there's restrictions. The maximum I should get from a single source is $200. That's the maximum. If I go to a political party which is a friend of, I can get $200. Now, where did NRM get their 42 billion? It's from the coffers. We know it's from the coffers. They will not admit it, but we know it's from the coffers. What I want to see is functional political parties which can address the problems which the people face. That's what we need. Right. How do we get there?
Let's go to Ambassador and retired Major James Kinobe, also Commissioner at the Electoral Commission of the NRM. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. You can hear, of course, these two gentlemen, your colleagues, think maybe you're playing the game. You're not playing a fair game.
Yeah,
you don't play fair.
I want to respond. They are raising two important issues, which I entirely support. The issue of appropriate funding by the taxpayers to the parties is within the legal framework, and I entirely support, according to the principles advanced by Honorable Kena. Definitely we need a very strong multi-party system. And the adoption of a decision that those who already have MPs, I think it was a wise decision, though, as you recall, many other parties were still insisting that why not every political party, and why do you discriminate? So on that principle, I don't have a problem with it. Two, from what they tell us and from what we know, there is a legal framework that guides that process of how they work. And they have regular meetings. I'm not privy to those meetings because these are very senior people. Me, I'm an employee of the Electoral Commission, which is a very small organ. The major representative for us as a party is the Secretary General of the party. But from what I know, is that some of these ideas should have been conditioned on the regular anticipated interactions within the political parties. And I think this is what could have prompted the amendment of the iPod law, that if you want to access public funding, then let us respect the iPod structures and the meetings and the commitments that we make there. I don't know what the basis was, but part of it, I saw they were tagging funding on active participation. What does that mean? It means that maybe the parties were more interested in the areas where the funding comes in, but not interested in the other sectors which they're talking about. For example, when we talk about funding, to have discussed the issue of funding now, when we're in the middle of a financial year, when both parties are in parliament, and you know, budgeting these days is a process. You have this budgeting cycle which runs almost 6 months or a year. I would have had these concerns and debates when the budget paper was being presented, when the legal is meeting the electoral commission to discuss their funding, and if that fund didn't come through the budget framework, it would have been unfair when iPod now finally goes to the electoral commission if they didn't back it up at the time when the parliament was developing the budget. What I would want to know from them, because both of them are in parliament, what component of that function was incorporated in the budget, because the leader of opposition is a very major component in parliament, and he himself also is in parliament. Then we could see whether the debate either didn't come out well or it was suppressed. But to come now at the electoral commission to say where is the money because we're in the electoral year, when the process that budgeted money didn't provide for it, I would now defend the electoral commission when they tell them that for us what we got is the money to run our activities. But I am just using that basis.
So yes,
if it is assumed that they did not raise it, then they are not fair to go there.
So the ball is back in your court, because one of the cardinal roles of a member of parliament is appropriation.
Absolutely. The appropriation is done by them.
Government is running on a budget that you have approved, that you have appropriated. So how could you not give yourselves?
Now, the provision in the law for the equal funding which Katana raised, it is in the election year.
Okay.
Which is this election year?
Election year. Yeah. Now, 2021 and 2016, that provision existed as it is. When it was raised, because this new funding, where we increased the funding from 10 billion to 35 billion, started under the UPC chairmanship of iPod, which then went on to Norbert Mao.
By all iPod members.
Yes, but now the next chair was Norbert Mao, which put flesh to it. We agreed in the principles. Under my leadership, the flesh came. Now that's the percentages. The 35, 15, 15. That came from the chairmanship of DP. Now, when it was raised, because this was supposed to be implemented in 2020 before the election, it was not done. Now, under the DP chairmanship, we had 2 summits. Mm-hmm. We are required to have one, but we had 2 summits. The second summit was in Kololo airstrip. The first one, or under DP, was in Protea in Entebbe, and under my chairmanship was in Monyonyo. Now, at that meeting in Kololo, when it was put to the president that the law provided that during election it is equal funding, the president said and acknowledged that his people, NRM, acted in an unchristian manner. His words, unchristian manner, i.e. they knew what the law said, but they decided to do opposite. That was his word, unchristian. Mm-hmm. At this time, we already had in place this new funding arrangement which was supposed to build the party, strengthen the parties. Now, these 5 years, we should have been able to have done this work. We have not done it, because the funding was not there. Now, at the last moment, we changed the funding mechanism, ostensibly to accommodate what we agreed. But the people who agreed were never part of the conversation. I was not part of the conversation. You saw me on the floor of Parliament where I was flabbergasted by what they did. So how do I deal with this issue? The president himself was unchristian. For me on the floor of Parliament, I said it was diabolical, because how do you know you're being unchristian and then now you try to do what you call in Kiswahili changa changa to change the whole game? And the whole target is these people of Noob.
So Benjamin,
apart from Noop, I've not helped you because you're not
appreciate one thing.
You are not being honest.
Well, I want you to help me to appreciate one thing. We are in the elections year.
Yes.
And the budget we are talking about started in June when we started, all of us, for setting up. And by the time we go through elections in Feb, we shall almost be completing the election year. What were the debates towards equal funding to the parties during the formulation of this budget, of this financial? Don't talk about the previous ones,
okay,
because we know we're in the financial year. This budget has just been adopted. During your debate process this time, what informed the debates to provide the equal funding for the parties as provided for by the law?
The equal funding of the parties is in the law.
But what informed it? You as an MP, you are in Parliament.
The law which NRM maneuvered to amend after the budget process, it is in the law. I.e., if we didn't tamper with the law, the 35 billion for this year is to be shared equally with the 7 political parties which were in Parliament.
Patrick. So this law was amended just a few days back.
No, Patrick.
It was amended after we passed the budget.
Patrick, the amendment
it was amended
in the law
after
was about
we passed
how
the budget.
to access the funding.
No.
Yes, that's why they were conditioning it, that parties to access the funding provided for an iPod should be compliant with the following. But for me, now I'm talking about the budget, the resource envelope. As we debated that law, what does you in Parliament? Tell us.
The party at fault for not complying to iPod, who have failed to hold a meeting in 4 years, is NRM.
But you had a platform in Parliament. Did you raise that in Parliament?
The iPod is not in Parliament.
No,
iPod touches Parliament, but the iPod...
Let me be helped.
Let me come.
iPod is comprised of parties that have members of Parliament in Parliament.
Yes.
One would have understood that the interested parties, and you have almost, I think, about 70 or 80 of them. I wanted
there's
to look
7 parties in Parliament.
How they debated.
Hold on.
I want to exonerate ourselves that as NRM and them, they are all parties. If they didn't raise it,
before
then the funding is not there in the Electoral Commission.
iPod has an MOU. The MOU is you hold the chair for 6 months. In that 6 months, you must have 2 council meetings, which involve secretary generals, party whips, and other members. You must have 2 council meetings and 1 summit. For 4 years, NRM has been in the chair. We've had no council meeting, we've had no summit, we've had nothing. UPC was in the chair, we had meetings. DP was in the chair, we had meetings. Under NRM, 4 years.
What does the law say about that?
It's not in the law. iPod is a memorandum.
Has been
what are the provisions?
It's an agreement. It's an agreement between the parties.
And Jimmy, Honorable, please hold on your point. Let me, Benjamin. Now, after hearing all that, and you fired the first salvo, what do you think we can move forward?
Well, I think the biggest challenge, because the old adage that if you don't know where you're coming from, you may not know where you're going. I think the challenges of funding are a small aspect of a bigger challenge of ideally, on the paper, we are under multi-party dispensation. And there has been an attempt to now allow the law take course by allowing political parties to have offices, conduct a few activities. But the culture and mentality of the NRM, which is now in power, is the mentality of a one-party state. In fact, the activities of all of us, NUP, UPC, and the rest, are treated as if the law does not allow us to operate. That is why, because I'm bringing in this aspect, because it has a relationship with the funding, that is why when a youth in Machindi fills nomination forms to be a leader for National Youth Council at the village level under NUP. The PISO, who is now a state employee, not a party employee, and all those they work with, make sure that this young person is not nominated, because for them they feel that the state and the party that is in power are one and the same. That explains the conduct of the Electoral Commission in these processes. It explains the conduct of the army in these processes. They feel that they are an extension of the political machinery of NRM. And historically, you realize that from the time that the NRA, which later transitioned into NRM, when they came into power, the first legal instrument they issued, legal notice number 1 of 1986, was to ban activities of political parties. They did not ban political activities, but they banned activities of political parties. And so for a period, for what they call the transition period, now they kept extending this transition period to the extent that when we went into a constitutional making process that resulted into the 1995 Constitution, even that matter was never resolved. Because at that time, the NRA political machinery had dominance in the Constituent Assembly. But there were voices that wanted multipartyism. They said, no, we will remain with this, then we shall have a referendum. The time for referendum came, it happened, and it was that time, the first one, the then head of state, who is still the head of state, campaigned against the return to multi-party politics. Then there was another referendum in which he now campaigned. He said, following a resolution of the National Executive Committee of the movement, that now we open the space. Not because there was a change of heart in terms, it was not a Damascus point from 7 and the NRA to welcome multipartyism, but they were responding to certain pressures. So they said, okay, we'll have the parties as a ritual. And that's how they have continued to treat political parties. That's why today, political party, our people go to do ordinary activities of a political party. For example, to build structures in the communities, and they are arrested. They have not committed any crime. But the people who work for the state, because there's that fusion between the state and the party, they believe that they have a duty and responsibility to stop competition against the ruling party.
All right. Gentlemen, hold on to your points, because we're going to take a break, and on the spot we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Kamara. My guests tonight are Ambassador James Kinobe, the Honorable Jimmy Akena, and Mr. Benjamin Katana. I just want to begin with you because of the disturbing things that came from Zimbabwe just a few hours ago. We are just beginning the election on the radio. One man is dead, shot allegedly by supporters of General Rwashande. Must it be that every time we're going to the election, Ugandans will lose lives, there's blood in our elections? What can we do to avoid blood?
It's political indiscipline, and it's very regrettable if what I've just seen was a result really of, first of all, troops that are not even supposed to be in politics. I'm told they are soldiers. I tried to call the RDC this evening, and she told me there is a unit attached to General Rwashande in the constituency where he's contesting, and I think some soldiers from that unit are the ones who raided Honorable Sechikubo's meeting. But I'm yet to get any of those details, but I've seen it on your news here. It's regrettable and very, very sad. I think it's something that we may have to take up with the leadership, because soldiers ordinarily are not supposed to be accompanying a candidate. But what we are told now, these are soldiers guarding a candidate. As of, I think 2-3 days ago, General Shande was nominated, and as a nominated candidate with the Honorable Sechikubo, they are equal at status. There is no general in that election. There is candidate Rashande and candidate Sechikubo. But we shall wait for the reports that are coming through, because the RDC promised me that the DPC and all the other officers had gone to see the scene and see what really happened. If it's just unruly soldiers on their own volition who did what they did, then definitely the soldiers will be taken to book. So I wouldn't imagine that a general at that level would command such an activity. But it's very sad and unfortunate, and we shall take it up as an NRM commission and a secretariat to ask government to explain the circumstances under which a platoon of soldiers is in the constituency, accompanied or ordinarily attached to a candidate who has been nominated.
Government will ask government.
Yeah.
So, but honestly, Honorable Jimmy Akena, when you see in party primaries of the NRM, and we see something like this violence at that level, that even resulting in death, that should be sending a cold chill down your spine.
You see, it will send a cold chill if you don't know what you're dealing with. NRM, NRA, in their roots, went to war for power. And don't believe this nonsense that, oh, elections were rigged. In 1980, we had multi-party election under the 67 Constitution. And the importance of that 67 Constitution did not outlaw political parties. The narrative is Obote was grabbing power, the 66, we talk about the pigeonhole 66 Constitution, then you had the 67 Constitution. 1980 election was held under the 67 Constitution without amendment. Meaning, Obote, when he had a chance to amend the Constitution, did not outlaw political parties. Not like them, who are now saying that when you have power, you must hold on to power. It's not the case. I am in sports. Sports, you compete under rules. When you lose, you go back and you prepare knowing you're going to come back to compete. For them, they take politics life and death. For them, it's life. For us, it's death. We have died for their politics. We are still dying for their politics. And what development are they bringing? Most of the people in the rural area, you want to stand on the rural area. There is nothing which they're offering. All the key ingredients for survival, health, education, many people are locked out.
And yet they keep returning NRM?
Because the whole system, now, you've got a very important point here. Let me give you what they fought for in the bush. According to their own document, which they put, number one, removal of UPC Obote's dictatorship by force of arms. I have just put here that 1980 elections under a multi-party constitution. So dictatorship should not be there. It was power grab. Number two, the establishment by force, if necessary, of a one-party popular democracy in Uganda under NRM. One-party popular democracy, that was the first word. It then became a system.
Okay.
It changed from a one party, became a system.
By the way,
then later on,
for the viewers, Dr. Milton Obote we're talking about, for him was not only just the president of Uganda, but also his father.
But he's not talking about him as the president of Uganda.
I'm talking about, I'm allowed to comment on this one, please. On this particular issue, the war which was fought, I'll give you some statistics. He's a major. Second World War, average age of a combat soldier was 26 years. In Vietnam, when America fought in Vietnam, average age of a combat soldier was 19 years. When they came to power, what was the average age of a combat soldier? We saw kids who were not voters in 1980, were not going to be voters at that time, were not even going to be voters in the next election. Those are the ones toting guns.
Because their parents...
Their votes had been rigged.
Their votes had been rigged.
People were not voters.
Never.
The explanation, part of the explanation is that...
That is the basis of their war.
Part of the explanation...
Now, those kids, no, you hear me. I don't know how old... But do you know the song of Paul Hardcastle in the 80s? About 19. They talk about the American soldiers. Now, these kids, 12-year-olds, which he was commanding maybe as a major, 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds, are being told, anyanya tutawapiga, anyanya tutamaliza. Now, these are the kids who went to the north, worked havoc. We're now crying about issue of cattle. We've lost our cattle. And we have Balalo with thousands of longhorns in our land where we lost our cattle. And you don't understand that you're creating tension in the society, you're creating chaos, and all of this issue is where we're going. An election is supposed to be, we go with our manifesto. We go with what we want to do for the people, how we want to improve the people's lives. Let the people decide. When I lose, I go back, I do some soul searching, I prepare next election. For them it's death. Even in primaries, they're killing themselves. Yeah. What do you expect?
It's very interesting for Jimmy to be so passionate and or even sounding very angry, because at one point you have been dining with them.
But Patrick, on top of that,
so yeah, you have been dining with them.
No, but we want to set the record.
Hear me on this one.
We just want to set some record.
Before he interrupts me, let me talk on this one. Mm-hmm. I engaged deliberately. I started my first issue politics. I engaged with Coin first, and my issue in the campaign was we need peace. We cannot have people in the camps all these years. When I stood in Lira in 2006, I had 41 IDP camps in Lira municipality. 41. Now, first issue was peace. It took me to Garamba. It also took me to State House. I also engaged on a personal level how we can restore the cattle economy in northern Uganda with the president, one-on-one. But this is not something which I can quarrel about because it's only two of us. The issues which we agreed in a group, we can quarrel about. Issues which we agreed on iPod, we can quarrel about. But that was my first issue. I engaged on the issue of Uganda, and I will always be Team Uganda. Everywhere.
Benjamin,
everywhere I'll be Team Uganda.
Let to be fair.
When it comes to Uganda, it's Uganda first.
Mabasa, before I come to you, because look, there have just been election of the special interest group, and this was a national election, and when you look, NRM really took the lion's share, and yet these are youth, majorly, and I would want to think that NUP is largely a youth-led kind of organization. But how they outflanked you, I just don't even understand. Because if they have big numbers at that level, then it's game over.
Yeah, but before coming to that, the question you asked earlier about what has transpired in Zimbabwe, one is that impunity is like a flood. You know, the flood does not discriminate. It will take the trees, it will take the houses, regardless of who owns them. Now, the moment you...
And my producer is trying to show the pictures
yes, of... the moment you allow
had a man down.
impunity to flourish, then you don't know whom it will affect and who will not be affected. Number two is that where I come from, we have a proverb that when a mother steals while carrying a child, is training this child to be a thief. The NRM has used violence of that nature against its opponents for the last close to 40 years now, or even 40 years. Now, it is not surprising that even the NRM people now are using the violence and guns against each other. Coming to the question of the youth and special interest groups, I have mentioned on this show, and I think when you are asking me to give a report on what transpired in the National Consultative Forum, the representatives of all the political parties that were present unanimously passed a resolution to the effect that the elections were marred by massive irregularities. Starting from a point of registers, that the youth who should have participated in these processes were denied, were defranchised. That is number one. Number two, at the time of nominations, in fact, we even lodged complaints to Electoral Commission before the voting. The young people from NUP, and I believe because the other day I was on a talk show with someone from PFF, they were complaining. The other day I was on a talk show with Honorable Jimmy Akena, and they were also complaining. At the point of nominations, these security people hijacked the process and ensured that only the people of NRM be nominated. In fact, where the youth who belong to the opposition won, it's not on account of excellent organization at that level, but it's on account of incompetence of the security officers who are deployed in those specific areas. They did not rig enough. But the process and the outcome have got nothing to do with the wish and will of the young people in those respective areas. But the process was hijacked. And mind you, this is, I think, the first time that the opposition has even tried to participate in this process. Why? Because it is always conducted in a manner that lacks transparency. The people who run the security infrastructure at the district, at the sub-county, sit with the people that are appointed by Electoral Commission to conduct that exercise, and they select who comes through as the leader. And you know the nature of these special interest groups is that if you don't go through at the village level, then you cannot participate in the subsequent ones as a voter. Maybe you can come as a candidate. So it's one of those organs of our political infrastructure that have been captured. And I can give you other examples. It is not just the special interest groups. There is Uganda National Students Association, there are all these. In fact, you'll ask yourself that how come the people of opposition are not participating in the elections of labor representatives, for example. It's not because we do not have people that are in these institutions, we do not have people that are workers, but because the process is shrouded in darkness, and the process is largely conducted by the members from the armed forces, and I've already mentioned on this show that the members of the armed forces view themselves as an extension of the political machinery of NRM. And I have mentioned that that is largely on account of the mentality of the NRM historically, the DNA and he read, I think it was point number one or number two, a single popular democracy.
One party, popular democracy, according to them.
They have always viewed this country as a country that is under only one party, which is NRM. The rest, that's why when you are in opposition, you are looked at as someone that is engaged in some
So, Ambassador, you can clearly see there has been a fusion of the NRM party and the state, and in some cases, people cannot even differentiate, is it the party or the state? In fact, there are some people who thought that the special interest group elections was an NRM thing, and they stayed away.
First of all, I want to agree with the colleagues that there were irregularities, which affected all of us. The only difference is that what my colleagues don't appreciate is that their parties never invested in this process and they only wanted to harvest out of it. I'll give you an example. On the 6th of May, as NRM, as a party, we invested in setting up party structures, starting from the villages. And it was visible all
At
over
42 billion.
Don't mind about the money.
Where from?
I will get to that.
Be clear.
Don't divert me. I'm trying to tell you that whatever we ripped out of that exercise was a deliberate structural arrangement by the NRM, because for us we went to village structures, and in every village you have 30 leaders, 5 representing the conference, the assembly of youth in the village, 5 leaders representing the women, 5 leaders representing the veterans, 5 leaders representing the others, and the mainstream. So at every village level, we created structures that started with even the league they're talking about, with the PWDs and so on. The next level was parish. And as we went to the SIGs, we were already at district level, but having set up the structures. So what you see as a result of our performance there was a deliberate investment we put in our structures. And I'll tell you, in many of the areas where we've even suffered losses, these friends in the parties of the opposition, for them they picked money, 20, 30, we laid some of our supporters as they get nominated. You get with their nominated candidate to the Electoral Commission, they tell you your candidate, your flag bearer has been already nominated in NOP. But because for us we had a pool, because we have a league, we have structures there, we would easily repress them. The second challenge we used to have is that some of these young people don't register in the Electoral Commission. Then some of the others, when you come with them, you find they are not registered. But otherwise, whatever you saw as an outcome down there is a deliberate structural arrangement of the NRM as a top, as a bottom-up arrangement. And that's why the other day I was joking in Uganda that I think with the NRM we were the real people power. Because for us to generate our power from the lowest grassroots, for you to sit with your conferences without people even knowing how do you generate a delegates conference at the top when you've not had any delegates from down. So even the levels we are going in, plus the recent nominations.
Okay.
We went through the nominations of expression of over 2,700 leaders. So in every constituency of Uganda, in every elective office, the party has got a candidate. Our friends are still going to complain that where do we get the votes from when they don't have even flag bearers in certain elective offices. So it is the mass party as NRM which invests in the people, and that is our strength. I wanted to add one small disclaimer to my brother here. When you see what we're suffering in multipartism, that was a disease sown in 1962 by the UPC government. They don't even have any moral authority to talk about constitutionalism. UPC, in 1963, on the eve of our independence, they amended the constitution to popularly bring in the Kabaka for their own reasons. Created the Kabaka being the president and Vice Chabazinga. Within 4 years, they had already moved on the very president they had set up and attacked him and pulled him off. Now, people who lost to UPC in 1962 were supposed to have had an election in 1967. These fellows had in their attorney general, sat in parliament, developed the pigeonhole constitution, and deemed every member of parliament to have been elected for another term of 5 years. So where is the moral authority of UPC talk about constitution? Actually, the deficiency we suffered is because of UPC. Because when we elected in 1962, Ugandans elected again in 1980. How many years were those? When you look at the countries like Kenya, which you admire, who are contemporaries of the UPC Prime Minister in Tanzania, for them they remained on a main course, practicing multi-party democracy. And that's why for them they are okay. Uganda instead, we suffered that deficiency, that malnourishment created by UPC in 1962 is now haunting us. It's only until 1990 that we've had repeated elections every 5 years. In our 40 years, at least we have had repeated elections when in over half of the time they went in the government. We never had elections at all. So we are grappling with that malnutrition we got at our infancy as a state, but we are going to overcome that with time, because this is the only party which has created even funding to opposition.
The chairman of their party has been super focused on removing multi-party democracy.
By the way, they are right. Ndugukatana and him, they are right. Actually, when we were campaigning for the return of multi-party, we were opposed, but because of the pressures from all over the world, as you know, said fine, if they think multi-party can work, let's go. But for us as a party, we still retained the semblance of working with everybody. That's why a UPC president, his wife is a minister, the DP president is also in this government. So I've continued to be broad-based, worked with everybody, apart from the parties that refuse, because we believe that every group has got a role to play in the governance of the country. Those who can work, he has been engaged with us, and we've worked progressively until maybe if he thinks the honeymoon is over. But his wife is still a minister, he has not been sacked. So that's how we thought we would build the country together without having artificial differences in our parties that are on region or region where you come from or what you believe in. And we still believe in those principles. But because we have been imposed on multipartism, okay. Yeah, we have it. But we still insist that let's work through IPOD, get the funding, even fund equally. Can you imagine? A party with one MP is going to get equally the same amount of money like NRM, which has over 300 MPs. But because we believe that each group, each player, has got a role to play, and a strong multi-party system has the government in power and the opposition to check it. And we believe that if it works well, the opposition is a government in waiting. Unfortunately, the multi-party system we have is still an opposition on everything. Instead of being, yes.
Where I come from in Ikenjojo, Honorable Jimmy Akena, when you somehow join the other group that you're not supposed not to be working with them, they give you a name, Indianabo. So the one who eats with them. So
he's Indianabo. He has actually been working with us. And we are still working with him. Because the wife is still in our cabinet.
Ambassador, by the way, Ambassador, I like the skill of the ambassador. He first brings his diplomatic skill, but meanwhile he's softening the blow.
No. Then he brings the NRA skill.
Okay. There is no blow he has softened. In fact, the word he has perjured himself on national TV. How long were you in power before you had the election?
We had the first 10 years to work a constitution.
10 years?
Yes.
10 years?
10 years of an all.
Wait.
10 years of all of them.
One at a time.
No, let me. As he spoke, can I answer your question?
I just wanted 10 years. 10 years is enough.
With all of you.
It's enough.
First, hold your point, Ambassador.
UPC was not in that 10 years. 2, how long was UPC in power before it was overthrown? Where you're saying you're in power, then you whatever. 8 years. The first UPC administration, 8 years, was overthrown. Them 10 years, no election. Now, the issue when you talk about, and I raised this one to the chairman of the Electoral Commission, going back to the original document from the Bush, ISO, NRA, Internal Security Organization, what is its role? Gathers intelligence and informs on all internal opposition to the revolution. Not to the republic, not to the country, to the revolution.
I don't know what you
So if Katana sits in a meeting where they are planning how they are going to capture power and develop Uganda, that is against the revolution. So I asked the chairman of the Electoral Commission, when you're calling these meetings, because there's a meeting, one of the first meetings, they called a meeting where I attended. I said, what is ISO doing here? What role does the Internal Security Organization have in the electoral process? ISO has been involved.
They don't do no.
Do you know where ISO has been involved? People who don't have NINs, who don't have IDs, they go through ISO to be on the register. That is ISO's role. What are they doing? Now, to go on this issue of the time, my first election was 2006. I was nominated, we buried my father on 24th October. I was nominated around 27th, the same day when Kiza came back. And they were queues. It was the last day of nomination, the last day of registration. That was October, around October 27th of 2005 for election in January of 2026. Now with the improvement in technology, the register has been improved. We now have national IDs, which we didn't have. Why is the election register being closed? February? We should be able to go further, because at that time you already have the energy, the momentum. Now this issue of the special interest groups which is talking about, it's absolute nonsense. We fight them in areas where we're strong, but they use the state structures.
Yeah.
They use the state structures.
How come they don't work in Lira and they work elsewhere where you don't have representation?
In Lira, we were able to get the elderly, we're able to get part of the youth.
You have Gisos there? You have Gisos. How did you overcome them?
We overwhelm you. We fight you, we overwhelm you. Now, this whole issue, where you find NRM in these areas where we're strong, it's only the special interest groups. Now, to part of their game, Lira City, the number of representatives for the city has been reduced drastically. That more than half are going to come from special interest groups where they believe they have advantage and where they have used the time to do it early, to do it whatever. Exactly. So this whole thing is a game. It's nonsense. But Kamara, before you leave this one, whether they're playing that game, I'm meeting them in the general. And I'm going to take them to task, and we're going to push them to the limit that they're going to understand that the people of Uganda are not going to take this nonsense. This nonsense of a president saying that an animal, I killed an animal. Which animal? This is the Republic of Uganda. You think it's just an animal you kill and you take?
Don't get annoyed.
No.
Patrick,
this
I want
is my
to give
country.
Information.
It's my country.
I just will give one piece of information.
Nothing. No. This country is ours. Whether you like it or not, you're not taking it anywhere. When you go, we'll put you on the ground. You're not taking this country anywhere. We're going to control this country as Ugandans.
Okay.
As Ugandans,
okay.
Collectively.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I will open the lines, but also I want to touch on the issue of the executive order. It's telling the cattle herdsmen in northern Uganda to leave. Some of them are there legally, they are legal owners of land because they are both. Some of them probably they are marauding without, they are not supposed to be there. Is the president maybe reacting to the pressure of the politics? Is it a game of numbers? We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amara, and my guest this evening, I have Ambassador and retired Ambassador and retired Major James Kinobe, Commissioner at the NRM Electoral Commission. I also have your neighbor Jimmy Akena, and also have Mr. Benjamin Katana. I just want to change gears now and look at the issue of northern Uganda, because there has been another executive order telling all the Balaro, or the cattle herdsmen in northern Uganda, to get out. But I also know there are people who are have legally settled in northern Uganda. And this is a very big issue, and I want to navigate this very carefully, because I don't want this sound to cause some kind of ethnic tension, because it has all the hallmarks of going haywire. How do we deal with the issue of the Balaro? Of course, there's already an executive order from your commander-in-chief, the chairman. I'm sure you can't go against that as much, but there are people who also are there legally.
You know, we just use the Balaro these days to describe them as a particular type of people, but for us when we were growing up, Balaro used to be a cattle keeper. Someone who keeps your cattle, whether you're in Uganda and you have some cows and I had, and then that person takes care of your cows. It's an occupation, but now we have turned it into...
It's an occupation. For example, a lot of the long-distance truck drivers are Somali.
Yes.
You can even just put it there. But this occupation, which is... there's a group which generally...
Let me develop my point. So what has happened now is that we are now creating an ethnicity called the Balaro from the definitions we get. But those of us who lived with them, then we know there are two categories of people who are Balaro. They were those Balaro who would help us to take care of our cows, even some of the Baganda who had cows. But there were some of those indigenous tribes that used to have cows. And the challenge with them, which was not only by then in other areas here, but it was also in the western Uganda, those who were always following green grass and water. Just like the Karamajong, they were made to believe that wherever there is grass and water, the nomads, wherever there is, so they would always actually migrate to wherever they would find grass. Now, when you come down south of the Kafu River, you'll find that most of the small areas we used to have been partitioned, they have been fenced off as farms and so on. Yet in the north, part of the areas are not yet fenced off. I have known some Balaro who lived in some parts of western Arua, deep inside there, but they've been there for over 50 years. And when you follow them, they were living along the river and following the grass without being discriminated against. The challenge now that has come up is that we have started calling them an ethnicity, isolating them, because, well, some of them, the features are very distinct where they live. And this is going to cause a very big problem. I'm very uncomfortable with the executive order that was given, because I don't know the details. If the executive order was to target everybody moving with the cows, even those who legitimately bought their land and so on, because it's a fact, in the north there's still vast land. It is communal land. No. Let me develop my point.
You're going to have time to respond.
You're going to have time to respond. Ndugu Akena knows that I'm his uncle. Down this way where he has his Ndugu Akena, we are your uncle. Down here in Uganda.
Yes, but this nonsense of free land is not there.
No, I didn't.
You go to Alaska and look for free land. Go to Russia and look for free land. Go to Asia and look for free land. Why do you think
And
the free land in northern
I
Uganda?
used my words, not free land. I'm saying there are some bona fide people who have actually gone into arrangement to occupy land. But there are also those marauding nomadic bararo.
Yes.
I hope that the executive order is targeting those marauding
Who
who are just moving around. And by those ones need even be educated. Because for them, they don't know the borders and boundaries. They follow water. If it dries up here, tomorrow you'll even find him in another area. What the president has been doing, some of the ethnicities he is connected to, is to teach them on how to live in one area, camp, and look after your cattle within the. First of all, it is even more profitable. Because once your cow walks kilometers and miles, then even the milk would have gone.
There's a claim that some of them are armed.
Well, I don't know.
So that doesn't make them
I've been
ordinary
watching Odongoto's clips. If you were to go by his clips, yes, he claims that some are armed. Then Ndugwakena is saying some of them actually get their payments when people come in choppers and so on. I don't know because I don't live there. My description was the genesis of what we knew of the Bararo then, their characteristics then, and the distinction between those who are nomadic and those who actually take care of cattle of other people. You may even find some of the northern leaders who have cattle can actually get.
You made your point, sir. Honorable Jimmy Akena, you come from northern Uganda. So what is the situation really like about the Bararo?
We do have people who take care of cattle as an occupation. And they exist. They live there, they take care of animals, I can employ them and the like. But the area where there's a problem is that these people who come, largely these animals come on trucks. And in the issue which you raised, it happened around 2007, 2008 when we had a crisis in Apache then. At that time I remember I met Asan Kasinje, the assistant inspector, former assistant inspector of general police. He was the one commanding the operation. And he spoke to me and said, please help. I arrived in the evening. In the evening, people are telling me a helicopter came out. At first, I didn't believe. In the morning, I'm having breakfast. I hear the helicopter take off. And I see it right off this same issue in Maruzi.
Maruzi Ranch?
We bought the Maruzi Ranch.
Yes.
My village was Maruzi. I see a helicopter take off and go back. Military helicopter. Now, there's nowhere a military helicopter can go to Maruzi, spend a night there without people knowing who it is. At that time, the minister was Nankabirwa, Ruth Nankabirwa. And I raised it to her that if you want to know whose animals are in Akoko Road now, you find out who took the helicopter. Now, this whole issue is we're playing around this thing. Many of those animals, and the animals which you're complaining about, somebody has got a farm, he has fenced his farm, he's put Frisian, but doesn't want to lose the longhorn. Brings the longhorn onto, like my ranch, where I had my short horns and had my boran. I don't have, because it was all been looted under their reign. Under their reign, looting came from Karamoja, the whole of the north, even West Nile, where you only exit is a Pakwach bridge. They said Karamojong took cattle from there. Now all this one, you now say, no, because of this one, no, what is this nonsense?
So your own ranch has been occupied now?
It's for more than 30 years.
You have Bararo on your farm?
On the farm. They wash their clothes in my deep tank, which has not been used for.
The wife has been a minister of land.
But don't let him how?
The wife has been a minister of land. Did you try to ask her to help?
The reason why.
How is that even possible?
The reason why I have not moved, the moment I move, is an issue which you touched on earlier. I'll be looked at starting an ethnic war.
No, but it's your land.
Yes. Now, if we remove the Malolo by force, it will be an ethnic war.
You have your deep tank and they are using it on your land.
Your personal own farm?
On my deep tank. On my land, they've been there.
We need to find out.
3 generations.
We need to ask Honorable Beta Mongi to tell us why she's not protecting seniors.
Then we're doubting your...
The reason I have not done it,
your capacity,
and the reason I'm here very
then
clear.
Your capacity to lead is in doubt.
No. I do not want to be the one to be named, have started an ethnic issue.
That's a different matter.
The moment I move on the land, believe me, people will move. The moment I say you people get out, people will listen to me. I have a following. I am being respectful. I am trying to be reasonable.
For 3 years.
But at the same time, we have been mistreated.
But
the compensation for the animals we lost.
That is not the subject of
the compensation of the animals we lost.
Personal farm. No. Subject under the executive order.
No.
It must be different.
I'm not talking about my personal issue. And nothing personal
what
here.
I'm saying, if they are on
the
your personal
animals
land,
we lost.
that's a legal thing. Doesn't
the animals we lost in northern Uganda, where they keep on saying compensation, we're doing this on time. It is something which needs to be addressed before even you start this issue, because people have been deprived, they've been in camp.
But do you agree also
at the same time, at the same time now,
do you agree, Jimmy?
While people were in camps, while people were in camps, believe me, in 2006, I was campaigning in Okwang. People in camps, and you're finding people with a stick, AK-47, a jacket, and this wrap.
Yeah, that place.
Deep in Otuke.
That place used to have Rakwena soldiers, maybe.
Deep in Otuke. Longhorn animals. There were no longhorn animals there. Where did they come from? We didn't have longhorn animals there. We had short horns.
But you also know that there are people who have legally settled in northern Uganda.
When the war was going on, they settled. No, they came, they took opportunity. Let's address it holistically.
All right.
Let's address it holistically.
Okay, let me Benjamin, what do you make of this?
I think we are dealing with a cocktail of problems. One is a very important conversation that as a country we have been glossing over. The question of unresolved historical problems. He has talked about the war. He has talked about people being forced into camps. And there are other things that he has not talked about that relate to some sentiments on how people were treated during that time. And there have been suggestions that this country needs to have a conversation, a truth and reconciliation conversation. Because this is not restricted to a land matter. The land matter, yes, but it is more than land. But number two, we also are dealing with a challenge of a Shabe. The NRM government always deals with these very sensitive issues in a very Shabe manner. This issue has dragged on for years. Today they say they have issued an order. 6 months down the road, nothing has happened. Then we go back to back and forth. Then they issue another order. Now, the best thing, in my view, particularly on that issue, should have been, and I've listened to many leaders from Acholi on that subject, and they have been talking about verification of establishing, did Kamara buy land? Whom did he buy it from? Was it personal land? Was it communal land? When you are buying land, as a buyer, you have a duty to conduct what is called due diligence. If land does not belong to Kamara but belongs to the clan, does Kamara have authority to sell this land to you? So if a person bought communal land from an individual, that person cannot blame anybody, but will blame himself or herself for not conducting sufficient due diligence. The other, and he has talked about a number of issues, compensation. So the other question that this country needs to have an honest conversation about is the question of ethnic polarization. Because we always shy away from confronting it. We were brought together by the British to form a nation called Uganda. But many times we have continued to have a compartmentalized attitude. People, we look at ourselves in terms of ethnic identity first, and then the national identity later. And that explains part of the problems that we are having. So it's not something that we can just gloss over. It is something that requires people to have an honest conversation on how we can deconstruct and reconstruct. The question of nomadism, it may have been acceptable many years ago. In 1944, when my grandmother was moving from Kasese, Busongora, to visit in Bukedi, to visit nomadic relatives who had gone with cows, is when she produced my mother on a railway wagon.
The Basongora were in Iteso as early as 1944.
We've existed, we coexisted
They
peacefully.
coexisted. There was no problem. But the question now should be, what is causing these tensions? The people who have coexisted for all these years. There is also another aspect. You see, there are these people who have their cows. Some of them have rented land, others have bought it. He has talked about people going, and it may sound like exaggerated, but there are also people in positions of authority and influence, especially in the military, who have acquired big chunks of land in those places. I don't know legally or illegally. That can be established through verification. The armed people they are talking about, they are not ordinary herdsmen. They must be people working for these ones who have acquired that land.
Okay.
And it can be established whether these ones have acquired. But the whole point is that in this country, when people have disputes, for example, over land, now it is happening in Acholi and Lango and everywhere else, but we have been having similar problems here in Uganda.
Yeah. Good.
People have disputes over land ownership that take 10 years to be resolved at individual level. The only advantage here is that it has been disputes between individuals. But now we are dealing with the question of disputes between individuals and communities, or maybe communities and communities.
Why does it become individual in certain parts of the country and it is a community in other parts of the country?
Because, Benjamin, that was your last point.
Because we don't have a uniform land tenure system in Uganda.
That was also your parting shot. Honorable Chinobe, your concluding remark.
No, my concluding remarks is that there, as he rightly says, we have so many unresolved issues. The only problem is we always politicize even small things. You push the blame, it's the NRM government, it is this other government. But I think we need to, maybe when you develop iPod formally, we need to develop a conversation that identifies things that touch all of us. The issue of land in Uganda is really a very, very big problem. The issue of absent landlords, the issue of Bibanja owners whose Bibanja have been taken up, and we thought that could be resolved by some of the provisions in the law. The issue of the tenure of communal land in the northern Uganda really needs to be recognized because their individuals don't own land, they are owned communally.
We do own land. We do. It's
Well,
just you don't understand the system.
Well, we are being told your land is customary, nobody owns it as an individual.
Thank you.
But these are outstanding issues that should not really burden
Let me have the
be
president
overloaded
of the Uganda
on our-
People's Congress give us his last word.
You see, this misunderstanding of land ownership, you have personal ownership within the communal setup. You have grazing lands,
So
you have the
can
right.
sell.
You can sell. You can sell. Now, what is happening is somebody comes and buys a 20 by 20 plot and then wants to graze the whole sub-county. That doesn't make sense. If you want a 20 by 20, you put your small hut there. But why do you want to move all over the place?
Sell to me that plot when I am a cattle keeper.
Let him
I would
go.
rather
Okay,
sell
now,
cows.
when you now go into the land, you'll find that this hunting ground belongs to this clan. This belongs to this family. Where are you going? You may come to my village and you think you can move everywhere. There are places I can go where you cannot go because I am part and parcel. But also in my village, I have Baruli who've been there from the time of my great-grandfather. Yeah. We coexist, but this issue of how things have been done, and this issue of this ethnic issue, the ethnic of the war, the ones who started the war. When you go to Luero, where they started the war, what was the ethnic opposition? There was a huge settler community, 2 different settler groups. They started the war. Anyanya, Anyanya, Anyanya. Now, I'm Anyanya here. You want to kill me also? What are you going to do? I am here in this country. This is my country. And I want it to work for every citizen. As UPC, we do not discriminate anybody. If you want services, you'll find it in Luero. You will find the same services. The same hospital you find in Luero, you find it in Butaleja, you find it in Anaka, you find it in Abim, you find it in Itojo, you find it everywhere. We provided equal services. What have they done for us? They have put us in camps. This whole issue which is talking about the truth and reconciliation, they killed it when we had negotiated it in the process of the peace process. But they preferred to try and bring Con's head on a plate. What did they get? A guitar and a wig.
And the countess.
Okay, gentlemen, Ambassador James Kinobe, Honorable Jimmy Akena, and Mr. Benjamin Katana. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for the time you have given us, for honoring the invitation to come and discuss these very important matters. And I know we are good people and have a good country. And Uganda, we have had a tumultuous past, but we always get through, and even this time around, we shall make it, Uganda. Good night and God bless Uganda.
Thank you. Good night to you. Thank you.